Inspector here with We the People Insider, and this is part 3 of the Google series. And you are watching the systematic destruction of the old guard. I'm calling this part 2B in the overarching series net, where we'll cover some of these corporations net that make up the old guard. And if you're just joining us for the first time, I want to encourage you to go back and actually take a look at this article, which is what we're covering here today. It is a fairly extensive article from January 2015. Otherwise, if you wish, you can go back on this channel and look for parts 1 and 2 of the reading of this article. So picking up where we left off before, this section is called Google Captures the Pentagon. In 2003, Google began customizing its search engine under special contract with the CIA for its IntelliLink Management Office, quote, overseeing top secret and sensitive but unclassified intranets for CIA and other IC agencies, end quote, according to Homeland Security Today. That year, CIA funding was also being quietly funneled through the National Science Foundation to projects that might help create, quote, new capabilities to combat terrorism through advanced technology, end quote. The following year, Google bought the firm Keyhole, which had originally been funded by In-Q-Tel. Using Keyhole, Google began developing the advanced satellite mapping software behind Google Earth. Former DARPA director and Highlands Forum co-chair Anita Jones had been on the board of In-Q-Tel at this time, and remains so today. Again, this being written in 2015. Then, in November 2005, In-Q-Tel issued notices to sell 2.2 million of Google stocks. Google's relationship with U.S. intelligence was further brought to light when an IT contractor told a closed Washington, D.C. conference of intelligence professionals on a not-for-attribution basis that at least one U.S. intelligence agency was working to, quote, leverage Google's user data monitoring, end quote, capability as part of an effort to acquire data of, quote, national security intelligence interest, end quote. A photo on Flickr, dated March 2007, reveals that Google Research Director and AI expert Peter Norvig attended a Pentagon Highlands Forum meeting that year in Carmel, California. Norvig's intimate connection to the forum as of that year is also corroborated by his role in guest editing the 2007 forum reading list. The photo below shows Norvig in conversation with Louis Shepard, who at that time was Senior Technology Officer to Defense Intelligence Agency, responsible for investigating, approving, and architecting, quote, all new hardware, software systems, and acquisitions for the global defense intelligence IT enterprise, end quote, including big data technologies. Shepard now works at Microsoft. Norvig was a computer research scientist at Stanford University in 1991 before joining Bechtolsheim's Sun Microsystems as senior scientist until 1994, and going on to head up NASA's Computer Science Division. And a little inset here, an extra article for you to ponder reading, goes into the details of how the CIA helped selling a mapping startup to Google. Now they won't tell us why. And this particular article actually goes into how Keyhole and so forth actually became part of Google and started up Google Earth. So yet another good read to go along with this one. Continuing on, Norvig shows up on O'Neill's Google Plus profile as one of his close connections. Scoping the rest of O'Neill's Google Plus connections illustrates that he is directly connected not just to a wide range of Google executives, but also to some of the biggest names in the U.S. tech community. Those connections include Michelle Westlander Quaid, an ex-CIA contractor and former senior Pentagon intelligence official who is now Google's chief technology officer, where she is developing programs to, quote, best fit government agencies' needs, end quote. Elizabeth Churchill, Google Director of User Experience. James Kuffner, a humanoid robotics expert who now heads up Google's robotics division and who introduced the term cloud robotics. Mark Drapeau, Director of Innovation Engagement for Microsoft's public sector business. Lily Chang, General Manager of Microsoft's Future Social Experiences, Fuse Labs. John Udell, Microsoft Evangelist. Corey Andreka, Vice President of Engineering at Facebook, to name just a few. In 2010, Google signed a multi-billion-dollar no-bid contract with the NSA's sister agency, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, NGA. The contract was to use Google Earth for visualization services for the NGA. Google had developed the software behind Google Earth by purchasing Keyhole from the CIA venture firm In-Q-Tel. Then, a year after, in 2011, another of O'Neill's Google Plus connections, Michelle Quaid, who had served in executive positions at the NGA, National Reconnaissance Office, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, left her government role to become Google Innovation Evangelist and the point person for seeking government contracts. Quaid's last role before her move to Google was a senior representative of the Director of National Intelligence to the Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance Task Force, and a senior advisor to the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence's Director of Joint and Coalition Warfare Support, JNCWS. Both roles involved information operations at their core. Before her Google move, in other words, Quaid worked closely with the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, to which the Pentagon's Highlands Forum is subordinate. Quaid has herself attended the forum, though precisely when and how often I could not confirm. And a little extra color around that by way of some of the FOIA requests surrounding Mr. Levine in regards to Information and Privacy Coordinator on May 27, 2015. And this is pertaining to Keyhole. Carrying on. In March 2012, then DARPA Director Regina Dugan, who in that capacity was also co-chair of the Pentagon Highlands Forum, followed her colleague Quaid into Google to lead the company's new Advanced Technology and Projects Group. During her Pentagon tenure, Dugan led on strategic cybersecurity and social media, among other initiatives. She was responsible for focusing on an increasing portion of DARPA's work on the investigation of offensive capabilities to address military-specific needs, securing $500 million of government funding for DARPA cyber research from 2012 to 2017. By November 2014, Google's chief AI and robotics expert James Kuffner was a delegate alongside O'Neill at the Island Forum 2014 in Singapore to explore advancement in robotics and artificial intelligence, implications for society, security, and conflict. The event included 26 delegates from Austria, Israel, Japan, Singapore, Sweden, Britain, and the US, from both industry and government. Kuffner's association with the Pentagon, however, began much earlier. In 1997, Kuffner was a researcher during his Stanford PhD for a Pentagon-funded project on networked autonomous mobile robots, sponsored by DARPA and the U.S. Navy. Next section, called Rumsfeld and Persistent Surveillance. In sum, many of Google's most senior executives are affiliated with the Pentagon Highlands Forum, which, throughout the period of Google's growth over the last decade, has surfaced repeatedly as a connecting and convening force. The U.S. intelligence community's incubation of Google from inception occurred through a combination of direct sponsorship and informal networks of financial influence, themselves closely aligned with Pentagon interests. The Highlands Forum itself has used the informal relationship building of such private networks to bring together defense and industry sectors, enabling the fusion of corporate and military interests and expanding the covert surveillance apparatus in the name of national security. The power wielded by the shadow network represented in the forum can, however, be gauged most clearly from its impact during the Bush administration, when it played a direct role in literally writing the strategies and doctrines behind U.S. efforts to achieve information superiority. In December 2001, O'Neill confirmed that strategic discussions at the Highlands Forum were feeding directly into Andrew Marshall's DoD-wide strategic review ordered by President Bush and Donald Rumsfeld to upgrade the military, including the Quadrennial Defense Review, and that some of the earliest forum meetings, quote, resulted in the writing of a group of DoD policies, strategies, and doctrine for the services on information warfare, end quote. That process of writing the Pentagon's information warfare policies was done in conjunction with people who understood the environment differently, not only U.S. citizens, but also foreign citizens and people who were developing corporate IT. Pentagon's post 9/11 information warfare doctrines were, then, written not just by national security officials from the U.S. and abroad, but also by powerful corporate entities in the defense and technology sectors. In April that year, General James McCarthy had completed his defense transformation review ordered by Rumsfeld. His report repeatedly highlighted mass surveillance as integral to DoD transformation. As for Marshall, his follow-up report for Rumsfeld was going to develop a blueprint determining the Pentagon's future in the information age. O'Neill has also affirmed that to develop information warfare doctrine, the forum had held extensive discussions on electronic surveillance and what constitutes an act of war in an information environment. Papers feeding into U.S. defense policy written through the late 1990s by RAND consultants John Arkia and David Ronfeld, both long-standing Highlands Forum members, were produced, quote, as a result of those meetings, end quote, exploring policy dilemmas on how far to take the goal of information superiority. One of the things that was shocking to the American public was that we weren't pilfering Milosevic's accounts electronically when we in fact could, commented O'Neill. Although the R&D process around the Pentagon transformation strategy remains classified, a hint at the DoD discussions going on in this period can be gleaned from a 2005 U.S. Army School of Advanced Military Studies research monograph in the DoD journal, Military Review, authored by an active Army intelligence officer. The idea of a persistent surveillance as a transformational capability has circulated within the National Intelligence Community, IC, and the Department of Defense, DoD, for at least 3 years, the paper said, referencing the Rumsfeld Commission Transformation Study. The Army paper went on to review a range of high-level official military documents, including one from the Office of the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, showing that persistent surveillance was a fundamental theme of the information-centric vision for defense policy across the Pentagon. We now know that just 2 months before O'Neill's address at Harvard in 2001, under the TIA program, President Bush had secretly authorized the NSA's domestic surveillance of Americans without court-approved warrants, and what appears to have been an illegal modification of the Thin Thread data mining project, as later exposed by NSA whistleblowers William Binney and Thomas Drake. And down at the bottom left there, you'll see A Good American, which, if you want to understand a little bit more about Binney and those guys, it's probably a good time to watch that and gain a little better understanding as well. So the next section, called the Surveillance Startup Nexus. From here on, Highlands Forum partner SAIC played a key role in the NSA rollout from inception. Shortly after 9/11, Brian Sharkey, Chief Technology Officer of SAIC's ELS-3 sector, focusing on IT systems for emergency responders, teamed up with John Poindexter to propose the TIA surveillance program. SAIC's Sharkey had previously been Deputy Director of the Information Systems Office at DARPA through the 90s. Meanwhile, around the same time, SAIC Vice President for Corporate Development, Samuel Visner, became head of the NSA's Signals Intelligence Programs. SAIC was then among a consortium receiving a $280 million contract to develop one of the NSA's secret eavesdropping systems. By 2003, Visner returned to SAIC to become Director of Strategic Planning and Business Development of the firm's intelligence group. That year, the NSA consolidated its TIA program of warrantless electronic surveillance to keep track of individuals and understand how they fit into models through risk profiles of American citizens and foreigners. TIA was doing this by integrating databases on finance, travel, medical, educational, and other records into a virtual, centralized grand database. Just dandy, folks. If you don't think the social credit score, everything about you isn't already here, this should pretty well lay it all out for you. This was also the year that the Bush administration drew up its notorious Information Operations Roadmap, describing the Internet as a vulnerable weapons system. Rumsfeld's I.O. roadmap had advocated that Pentagon strategy should be based on the premise that the Department of Defense will fight the net as it would an enemy weapons system. The U.S. should seek maximum control of the full spectrum of globally emerging communications systems, sensors, and weapons systems, advocated the document. The following year, John Poindexter, who had proposed and run the TIA surveillance program via his post at DARPA, was in Singapore participating in the Highlands 2004 Island Forum. Other delegates included then Highlands Forum co-chair and Pentagon CIO Linton Wells, president of notorious Pentagon information warfare contractor John Rendon, Carl Lowe, director of the Joint Forces Command, JFCOM, Joint Advanced Warfighting Division, Air Vice Marshal Stephen Dalton, Capability Manager for Information Superiority at the UK Ministry of Defence, Lieutenant General Johan Kill, Swedish Army Supreme Commander, HQ's Chief of Staff, among others. As of 2006, SAIC had been awarded a multi-million-dollar NSA contract to develop a big data mining project called Execute Locus, despite the colossal $1 billion failure of its preceding contract known as Trailblazer. Core components of TIA were being quietly continued under new code names, according to the Foreign Policy's Shane Harris, but had been concealed behind the veil of the classified intelligence budget. The new surveillance program had by then been fully transitioned from DARPA's jurisdiction to the NSA. This was also the year of yet another Singapore Island Forum led by Richard O'Neill on behalf of the Pentagon, which included senior defense and industry officials from the US, UK, Australia, France, India, and Israel. Participants also included senior technologists from Microsoft, IBM, as well as Gilman Louis, partner at technology investment from Alsop Louis Partners. Most of those countries kind of sound like the formation of the Five Eyes, doesn't it? Gilman Louis is a former CEO of In-Q-Tel, the CIA firm investing especially in startups developing data mining technology. In-Q-Tel was founded in 1999 by the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology, under which the Office of Research and Development, ORD, which was part of the Google funding MDDS program, had operated. The idea was to essentially replace the functions once performed by the ORD by mobilizing the private sector to develop information technology solutions for the entire intelligence community. Louis had led In-Q-Tel from 1999 until January 2006, including when Google bought Keyhole, the In-Q-Tel funded satellite mapping software. Among his colleagues on In-Q-Tel's board in this period were former DARPA director and Highlands Forum co-chair Anita Jones, who is still there, as well as founding board member William Perry, the man who had appointed O'Neill to set up the Highlands Forum in the first place. Joining Perry as a founding In-Q-Tel board member was John Seeley Brown, then chief scientist at Xerox Corp and director of its Palo Alto Research Center, PARC, from 1990 to 2002, who is also a longtime senior Highlands Forum member since its inception. In addition to the CIA, In-Q-Tel has also been backed by the FBI, NGA, and Defense Intelligence Agency, among other agencies. More than 60% of In-Q-Tel's investments under Louis' watch were in companies that specialize in automatically collecting, sifting through, and understanding oceans of information, according to Medill School of Journalism's News 21, which also noted that Louis himself had acknowledged it was not clear, quote, whether privacy and civil liberties will be protected, end quote, by government's use of these technologies for national security. Of course. The transcript of Richard O'Neill's late 2001 seminar at Harvard shows that the Pentagon Highlands Forum had first engaged Gilman Louie long before the Island Forum. In fact, shortly after 9/11, to explore what's going on with In-Q-Tel. That forum session focused on how to take advantage of the speed of the commercial market that wasn't present inside the science and technology community of Washington, and to understand the implications for the DoD in terms of the strategic review, the QDR, Hill action, and the stakeholders. Participants of the meeting included senior military people, combatant commanders, several of the senior flag officers, some defense industry people, and various U.S. representatives, including Republican Congressman William Mack Thornberry and Democrat Senator Joseph Lieberman. Both Thornberry and Lieberman are staunch supporters of NSA surveillance and have consistently acted to rally support for pro-war, pro-surveillance legislation. O'Neill's comments indicate that the forum's role is not just to enable corporate contractors to write Pentagon policy, but to rally political support for government policies adopted through the forum's informal brand of shadow networking. Repeatedly, O'Neill told his Harvard audience that his job as forum president was to scope case studies from real companies across the private sector, like eBay and Human Genome Sciences, to figure out the basis of U.S. information superiority, how to dominate the information market, and leverage this for what the President and the Secretary of Defense wanted to do with regard to transformation of the DoD and the Strategic Review. By 2007, a year after the Island Forum meeting that included Gilman Louie, Facebook received its second round of $12.7 million worth of funding from Excel Partners. Excel was headed up by James Breyer, former chair of the National Venture Capital Association, NVCA, where Louie also served on the board while still CEO of In-Q-Tel. Both Louie and Breyer had previously served together on the board of BBN Technologies, which had recruited ex-DARPA chief and In-Q-Tel trustee Anita Jones. Facebook's 2008 round of funding was led by Greylock Venture Capital, which invested $27.5 million. The firm's senior partners included Howard Cox, another former NVCA chair, who also sits on the board of In-Q-Tel. Apart from Breyer and Zuckerberg, Facebook's only other board member is Peter Thiel, co-founder of defense contractor Palantir, which provides all sorts of data mining and visualization technologies to U.S. government, military, and intelligence agencies, including the NSA and FBI, and which itself was nurtured to financial viability by Highlands Forum members. Palantir co-founders Thiel and Alex Karp met with John Poindexter in 2004. According to Wired, the same year Poindexter had attended the Highlands Island Forum in Singapore. They met at the home of Richard Pearl, another Andrew Marshall acolyte. Poindexter helped Palantir open doors and to assemble, quote, a legion of advocates from the most influential strata of government, end quote. Thiel had also met with Gilman Louie of In-Q-Tel, securing the backing of the CIA in this early phase. And so we come full circle. Data mining programs like Execute Locus and projects linked to it, which were developed throughout this period, apparently laid the groundwork for the new NSA programs eventually disclosed by Edward Snowden. By 2008, as Facebook received its next funding round from Greylock Venture Capital, documents and whistleblower testimony confirmed that the NSA was effectively resurrecting the TIA project with a focus on internet data mining via comprehensive monitoring of email, text messages, and web browsing. We also now know, thanks to Snowden, that the NSA's X-Keyscore digital network intelligence exploitation system was designed to allow analysts to search not just internet databases like emails, online chats, and browsing history, but also telephone services, mobile phone audio, financial transactions, and global air transport communications, essentially the entire global telecommunications grid. Highland Forum partner SAIC played a key role, among other contractors, in producing and administering the NSA's X-Keyscore, and was recently implicated in NSA's hacking of the privacy network Tor. The Pentagon Highlands Forum was therefore intimately involved in all this as a convening network, but also quite directly, confirming his pivotal role in the expansion of the U.S.-led global surveillance apparatus. Then Forum co-chair, Pentagon CIO Linton Wells told FedTech magazine in 2009 that he had overseen the NSA's rollout of an impressive long-term architecture last summer that will provide increasingly sophisticated security until 2015 or so. Just dandy. And so now we get to the Goldman Sachs connection. When I asked Wells about the forum's role in influencing U.S. mass surveillance, he responded only to say he would prefer not to comment and that he no longer leads the group. As Wells is no longer in government, this is to be expected. He is still connected to Highlands. As of September 2014, after delivering his influential white paper on Pentagon transformation, he joined the Monterey Institute for International Studies, MIIS, Cybersecurity Initiative, CISEC, as a distinguished senior fellow. Sadly, this was not a form of trying to keep busy in retirement. Wells's move underscored that the Pentagon's conception of information warfare is not just about surveillance, but about the exploitation of surveillance to influence both government and public opinion. The MIIS CISEC initiative is now formally partnered with the Pentagon Highlands Forum through a Memorandum of Understanding signed with MIIS Provost Dr. Amy Sands, who sits on the Secretary of State's International Security Advisory Board. The MIIS CISEC website states that the MOU signed with Richard O'Neill, quote, paves the way for future joint MIIS CISEC Highlands Group sessions that will explore the impact of technology on security, peace, and information engagement. For nearly 20 years, the Highlands Group has engaged private sector and government leaders, including the Director of National Intelligence, DARPA, Office of the Secretary of Defense, Office of the Secretary of Homeland Security, and the Singaporean Minister of Defense, and creative conversations to frame policy and technology research areas, end quote. Who is the financial benefactor of the new Pentagon Highlands partnered MIIS CISEC initiative? According to the MIIS CISEC site, the initiative was launched, quote, through a generous donation of seed funding from George Lee, end quote. George C. Lee is a senior partner at Goldman Sachs, where he is Chief Information Officer of the Investment Banking Division and Chairman of the Global Technology, Media, and Telecom TMT Group. Very interesting. But here's the kicker. In 2011, it was Lee who engineered Facebook's $50 billion valuation and previously handled deals for other Highlands-connected tech giants like Google, Microsoft, and eBay. Lee's then boss, Stephen Friedman, a former CEO and chair of Goldman Sachs and later senior partner on the firm's executive board, was also a founding board member of the In-Q-Tel, alongside Highlands Forum overlord William Perry and Forum member John Seely Brown. In 2001, Bush appointed Stephen Friedman to the President's Intelligence Advisory Board, and then to chair that board from 2005 to 2009. Friedman previously served alongside Paul Wolfowitz and others on the 95 to 96 Presidential Commission of Inquiry into U.S. intelligence capabilities, and in 1996 on the Jeremiah panel that produced a report to the Director of the National Reconnaissance Office, NRO, one of the surveillance agencies plugged into the Highlands Forum. Friedman was on the Jeremiah panel with Martin Faga, then Senior Vice President and General Manager of MitraCorp's Center for Integrated Intelligence Systems, where Thrasingham, who managed the CIA, NSA, MDDS program that inspired DARPA counter-terrorist data mining, was also a lead engineer. What a nice little incestuous family this is. And the footnotes to a chapter for the book Cyberspace and National Security, Georgetown University Press, SAIC/Leidos executive Jeff Cooper reveals that another Goldman Sachs senior partner, Philip J. Venables, who as Chief Information Risk Officer leads the firm's programs on information security, delivered a Highlands Forum presentation in 2008 at what was called an enrichment session on deterrence. Cooper's chapter draws on Venable's presentation at Highlands with permission. In 2010, Venables participated with his then boss Friedman at an Aspen Institute meeting on the world economy. For the last few years, Venables has also sat on various NSA cybersecurity award review boards. In sum, the investment firm responsible for creating the billion-dollar fortunes of the tech sensations of the 21st century, from Google to Facebook, is intimately linked to the U.S. military and intelligence community, with Venables, Lee, and Friedman either directly connected to the Pentagon's Highlands Forum or to senior members of the forum. Next section, Fighting Terror with Terror. The convergence of these powerful financial and military interests around the Highlands Forum through George Lee's sponsorship of the forum's new partner, the MIIS-CISEC initiative, is revealing in itself. MIIS-CISEC's director, Dr. Itamara Lockhart, has long been embedded in Highlands. She regularly presents current research on non-state groups, governance, technology, and in conflict to the U.S. Office of the Secretary of Defense Highlands Forum, according to her Tufts University bio. She also, quote, regularly advises U.S. combatant commanders, end quote, and specializes in studying the use of information technology by, quote, violent and nonviolent sub-state groups, end quote. Dr. Lockhart maintains a comprehensive database of 1,700 non-state groups, including, quote, insurgents, militias, terrorists, complex criminal organizations, organized gangs, malicious cyber actors, and strategic nonviolent actors, end quote, to analyze their organizational patterns, areas of cooperation, strategies, and tactics. Notice here the mention of strategic nonviolent actors, which perhaps covers NGOs and other groups of organizations engaged in social political activity or campaigning, judging by the focus of other DoD research programs. As of 2008, Lockhart has been an adjunct professor at the U.S. Joint Special Operations University, where she teaches a top-secret advanced course on irregular warfare that she designed for senior U.S. Special Forces officers. She has previously taught courses on internal war for senior political military officers of various Gulf regimes. Her views thus disclose much about what the Highlands Forum has been advocating all these years. In 2004, Lockhart was co-author of a study for the U.S. Air Force's Institute for National Security Studies on U.S. strategy toward non-state armed groups. The study, on the one hand, argued that non-state armed groups should be urgently recognized as a Tier 1 security priority, and on the other, that the proliferation of armed groups, quote, provides strategic opportunities that can be exploited to help achieve policy goals. There have and will be instances where the United States may find collaborating with armed groups is in its strategic interests, end quote. But sophisticated tools must be developed to differentiate between different groups and understand their dynamics, to determine which groups should be countered and which could be exploited for U.S. interests. Armed group profiles can likewise be employed to identify ways in which the United States may assist certain armed groups whose success will be advantageous to U.S. foreign policy objectives. In 2008, WikiLeaks published a leaked restricted U.S. Army Special Operations Field Manual, which demonstrated that the sort of thinking advocated by the likes of Highlands expert Lockhart had been explicitly adopted by U.S. Special Forces. Lockhart's work thus demonstrates that the Highlands Forum sat at the intersection of advanced Pentagon strategy on surveillance, covert operations, and irregular warfare, mobilizing mass surveillance to develop detailed information on violent and nonviolent groups perceived as potentially threatening to U.S. interests or offering opportunities for exploitation, thus feeding directly into U.S. covert operations. That ultimately is why the CIA, the NSA, the Pentagon spawned Google, so they could run their secret dirty wars with even greater efficiency than ever before. So, that concludes this particular article. There is a part 2 to this. We're not going to get into that here today, But just to continue on here, this Dr. Nafiz Ahmed is an investigative journalist, best-selling author, and information security scholar. A former Guardian writer, he writes the System Shift column for Vice's Motherboard, and is also a columnist for Middle East Eye. He is winner of a 2015 Project Censored Award for Outstanding Investigative Journalism for his Guardian work. Nafiz has also written for The Independent, Sydney Morning Herald, The Age, The Scotsman, Foreign Policy, The Atlantic, Quartz, Prospect, New Statesman, Le Monde, Diplomatique, New Internationalist, Counterpunch, Truth Out, among others. He is the author of A User's Guide to the Crisis of Civilization and How to Save It, 2010, and the sci-fi thriller novel Zero Point, among other books. His work on the root causes and covert operations linked to international terrorism officially contributed to the 9/11 Commission and the 7/7 Coroner's Inquest. This exclusive is being released for free in the public interest and was enabled by crowdfunding. I'd like to thank my amazing community of patrons for their support, which gave me the opportunity to work on this in-depth investigation. Please support independent investigative journalism for the global commons. So again, this concludes the reading of this particular article. I thought it worthy enough to share with you guys if you had not seen it. I think this is a very, very, very good backdrop for what we're about to cover in the next couple parts to Google. And what we'll do in the next couple parts is kind of walk through a timeline of where Google has more or less infested society, both on public and private sector side, and just see how integrated it has become. From there, obviously, we'll get into where Q has started calling out Google, and I think to date there's at least 50 posts pertaining to Google, not including Eric Schmidt from when we had the 2017 executive order drop. So we know that they've certainly got an eye on Google, and this is particularly why we see that. I think if you need to go back and reread and listen to this stuff, go ahead and do so. Let it sink in, understand who the players are, all the various pieces and parts to this moving operation. So thanks for listening, and we'll holler back at you soon.